I'm Caden Love.
And I'm Seema Love, his wife.
And we are Love and Lore, taking dark fantasy, light fantasy, and everything in between. And joining us today is debut author Corbin Rook.
Yay! He's being published for our Svetling Press, which is like our little project that we want to continue doing and keep helping talented upcoming authors get published.
And it's been an awesome time working with him to really see his book take shape. And we are so excited to talk about it today so that we can get all of you wonderful readers out there checking out something that we really love. So why don't you go ahead and give us a short introduction, who you are, what you write, etc.
Sure, awesome. Well, and thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, in private for this, helping me out and helping with this book, but, just on your channel as well, I wanted to say thank you. And working with the two of you has been awesome, been so helpful. It's definitely like a whole new world out there, and I've got lots of questions. You all have always responded very quickly and very helpful, and so just wanted to say thank you for that. And to anyone that's watching this, what you see on camera with Caden and Seema is what you get behind the scenes too. They're very genuine, very kind people. But to introduce myself, so I'm Corbin Rook. So I'm a new dark fantasy author being published on their Svetling Press banner. So my book is a post-apocalyptic dark fantasy that takes some really fun, creative monsters and a dark story, but introduces this idea that no matter how dark things get, there's always this sense of hope. And so that's my story in a nutshell.
Yes, and I just wanted to let you know right away that working with you has been a blast too. It's so easy to cooperate with you. And when we were all reading all the submissions, your book stood out because you could just tell that it has been worked on for a while. It felt polished. It felt ready for publication. And then after we called you, I remember, and we asked you about this, and you were like, oh yeah, I rewrote this like 4 times already or something like that. Can you say it again? How long did it take you to write this? How many rewrites did it take you to get to that point?
Yeah, so I was talking to my wife about this earlier today, and it's easier for me to think about how long it took me just by the age of my son, because I started writing it right around the time he was born. So he's 3.5 now. So it's been 3.5 years. But, it's one of those things where I was like, I've always wanted to do this. And I've had this idea for a very long time. I tried in my early 20s, and it just didn't work out then. And I can remember telling my wife, it's like, maybe I'm just meant to read books and not really write them. But I knew I was going to regret it if I didn't give it a try. So I tried again. So it took 3.5 years. The first draft took about a year. And I got to the end of it, and I was like, this is horrible. This is the worst thing I've ever read. No one can ever read this. This is so bad. But that was honestly one of the things that helped me get through that first draft, was just letting it be bad. And if you read it, you'd be like, this is awful. But it's kind of purposefully awful. I was experimenting with different things, trying to find out what works. Character dynamics, for example, it's like, does it work better if they don't get along? What about if they have a jokey vibe? What if they are kind of friends, but they're quiet together? Just different vibe, trying to figure out what it is that works. The powers change as the book goes on. It's a mess. But so I finished that, and I knew it was just garbage, but I could see a couple nuggets that were interesting and I thought were fun. And so I rewrote it a second time from scratch, kind of building around those nuggets. And at the end of it, I was like, this is better. And so I let my wife read it, and she said, yeah, it's okay. But what about, this, and this? And so I was like, that was a good point. So I went back and rewrote it a third time. Each time got a little bit faster because my brain kind of started to learn how you write a book and what makes it work and tick. And so I wrote a third draft, got a little bit better. I thought, I think I can do better than this. And so I went back, did it a fourth time. And then from that point on, I stopped rewriting, but there were still lots of rounds of revisions. So I shared it with some friends, and they said, oh, this is pretty good, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And so then I went through and did another round of revisions, shared it with some strangers at that point, and they said, oh, it's pretty good, but what about this? And so I went back, did another round of revisions. And then at that point is when you all got to see it. So there've been other rounds of revisions even since then that you're now aware of, or you're of course aware of. But yeah, so it's been written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten over and over and over again.
And so after doing all of that, giving it to other people, having them get feedback, what was it like doing your revisions and going to a professional revisions? What was your experience like doing that as now an author being published?
When it was friends, what was fun and a challenge was trying to figure out what pieces of advice I needed to follow. You know, there's some pieces of advice, or hey, change this or go in this direction, that it's like, I don't know if I agree with that. And so you have to really sit and think about that. And, you know, is there any truth to this? You know, even if 5% of it is true, how do I implement that 5% into the story? Some changes were very small, but then it would have a huge ripple effect as the story goes on. And so it's a tiny tweak, but then would require lots of revisions. And so just trying to put aside ego and think, you know, what's true about this? What are the patterns that people are saying within these comments? And how do I digest all of this and make this the best story possible, regardless of how much it hurts me to have to rewrite this again? Then working with a professional editor has been great. Rachel, you know, with Bard and Butter is fantastic. And what I really like about her is she is able to really give different tiers of recommendations for like, hey, this is something that I thought was a little bit confusing. Here's suggestions on how you might be able to improve this. I don't know. She's just very, very helpful. I think she's a gift. From very minute changes to, hey, you know, here's a grammar error. You missed a comma here. Continuity errors was something I was laughing with my writing group, where there's a scene where the character sits down and has a conversation, but it's a long conversation. And so when I was writing it, it took me several days to write. And at some point while writing it, my brain said he was now standing up, but I never wrote that in. And so later on in the scene, he trips, and the editor was like, hey, so you had him sit down and then 2 pages later he trips. Like, that makes no sense. I'm like, that's a great continuity error. Or, you know, if somebody sets like a helmet down and they don't pick it up, but they never go back to that room, and then 4 chapters later they're in their helmet. So, well, you need to write a scene where they pick up that helmet or show that they at least brought it with them. So things like that was super helpful. And it's so easy to get lost in the weeds when you're writing something that's, you know, 100,000 plus words long, and it makes sense in your head, and especially as you go through over and over and over again. It's easy to start missing some of those details and to get nose blind.
Yeah. It's so funny. Like, you were mentioning these things, like, I didn't remember seeing those things when I was reading your book, and I read your book before it went to the editor. It was great even then, but that's the importance of editors right there. So
Exactly.
We're gonna tell our viewers that Corbin is already working on future books for the series. So can you tell us a little more? What are your plans for the series in general?
Yeah, so the idea with the story in the series is that there are 3 standalone novels, and you can start anywhere, and you don't have to read the other 2 in order to understand what happens in the one that you start in. There are certain scenes that might be recontextualized once you read the others, but they're all 3 are 3 separate adventures that are happening at the same time. And the endings of those stories, the readers will say like, oh, this has a lot of implications for the characters over here. And then I'm working and outlining on a 4th story now where all of those implications are actually realized, and conflicts that happen will pop up. I loved the idea that main characters from different books that you know are heroes are put at odds because of just the endings of their stories and the allegiances that they have. And so you're like, I like that guy, I like her, I like him. I wish they could all get along, but because of their backgrounds and where they're at right now, and their specific stories, they're having to come into conflict. And so that's what I'm planning for that 4th book. So you could start anywhere in the first 3 and read them in any order, but then there would be a 4th book that would tie it all together, and there's a lot of conflict with the characters of each of those main 3.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Where did you get the idea for that? Has series like that have been written before?
Not that I can think of.
Yes.
Yeah, I got the idea because I was assuming I would fail querying my novel. And I didn't want to write all these sequels that stacked on each other and then if the first one, nobody picked it up and it never got out there at all, then the whole thing falls apart. And so my thought was like, well, maybe book number 3 is the one that gets picked up, and then the other 2 can kind of come with it. And so that was my idea.
And I think that's the thing. It will take time to get everything out there, but once it's all out there, you're going to have a lot of people wanting to read it in that way. And hopefully you have fans of it being like, oh, here's the one I think you should start with. Or like, oh, I started with this one, but this one was my favorite, things like that. So it'll be really cool to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's one of my beta readers read the second one, but then had not read Shadows of the Sundered, which is coming out. And so he's gone back and read Sundered now as an art copy. And he texted me today and he said, Shadows of the Sundered is very dark and has some horror elements, but it's more environmental, like what's happening around the characters. Book 2 that he has read, he said it's not environmentally dark, but it's the circumstances are so dark and horrific. He said, I actually feel like this is a darker book, even though there's not monsters and, this horrible hellscape they're having to go through. He said, this is actually a darker book because their circumstances have become so much darker. And so I thought that was fun. And it shows the different sides you can do with dark fantasy and dark stories, again, while still maintaining that line of hope.
Exactly. That's really, really cool. And so, while writing the series, what have been some of your favorite moments, without giving away spoilers, or some of your favorite characters that you've really grown to love?
Yeah, so favorite character, there's a character that's introduced in the prologue named Luick, and he was a blast to write because he was inspired by the intrusive thoughts in my own mind. Without spoiling anything about him, basically his only way to interact with the world is through what he can say. And so he really struggles with that. And, while some people would get bitter, his way of coping with that is kind of humor at inappropriate times. And it's, again, just inspired by, you'll be in a very serious meeting or a serious discussion, and my brain will start making jokes or like, hey, say this, that would be inappropriate to say right now, or things like that. It's like, no, Brian, stop. I'm not going to say that. Stop. And that's Luick. And so he was a ton of fun to write. So I did not write myself into the story, but if you want to know just what it's like in my brain, Luick and his comments and commentary. So he was fun. Then favorite moments. So without any spoilers, one of the things I wanted to do was, especially in a world where there's all these monsters that are created, there's so many great monsters in the fantasy world and fantasy genre. It's like, I really want to create one that's unique and kind of stands on its own. It's like this, if this could be a classic monster in the fantasy genre. And so I made this creature called the Reaper. Again, don't want to go too many spoilery details. One of the things that kind of leans into the horror elements is it has eyes, lots of eyes, but in the wrong places, like its shoulder and the sides of its neck and things like that. And every time one of these creatures shows up, it's going to be a really big moment. And so that's all I'll say for the readers is anytime you hear about one of these Reapers showing up, it's something's about to go down.
That's really cool.
When you were saying that Luick is kind of intrusive thoughts, it made me think of how I feel your book had a lot of mental health and disability in it. I feel like that was probably one of your biggest inspirations for your book. But what were some other ones? And if you want to share more about the mental health stuff, feel free to share that too. Sure.
Yeah. The idea for this world that was, covered in corruption, transform people to monsters, it's an idea that I had as a kid, actually. So I was playing, Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, and I just had this idea, like, what if all these monsters that Link has to fight, what if they were once people, and that they were transformed, and now they're these monsters? And so as I would play the game, I kind of made my own story in my head that he worked for some sort of messenger system and had to connect all of these different disconnected cities, but fight all these monsters that used to be people. And so that was kind of the idea. And so I tried writing it when I was in my early 20s. Again, it just didn't work out then. And so as I started reading more and getting more inspirations, from big authors today, Brandon Sanderson, you can't be writing a fantasy book and not have some sort of inspiration that comes from him. Seeing, like great characters and character camaraderie and stories like the Rhaenyra Revelations. Trying to take the pieces of that I liked and work it into my story. One of the big things that changed from that second draft to the future drafts is my wife said, your character is a little bit too like perfect almost. She's like, he needs some more flaws. He needs something that he's working through. And so as I started to rewrite it, I thought, what's a lesson that I needed when I was in my early 20s? And maybe I could give that flaw to him and make this like this book is a lesson for that younger version of myself. And so one of my many flaws that I'm still working through is this idea. It's like, I can't fail. It's like, I always have to succeed. If I messed up or failed, that's just the end of the line. It's the worst thing that can happen. And so one of the things I've had to learn, and I'm still learning, is there can be value in failure, provided you fail the right way. And so that's the theme of this book is he's terrified at the idea of failure and feels this pressure to always be perfect. And there's sometimes you have to fail. Or what do you do when there's unwinnable odds? Things like that. And so that's contributed a lot to the mental health. It expresses itself in the main character of Cam in anxiety, some post-traumatic stress disorder. And then as I was writing it too, I wanted to make sure that there was a good character foil to him. So he's a very strong, very powerful character, but from an emotional standpoint is struggling. And so I wanted to give a character that physically was much weaker, but emotionally was extremely resilient. And so I wrote this character named Czech. And Czech is my wife's favorite character. So she is a very gritty woman who lives in this vastly overpopulated city where there's not enough food to go around, and there's some rumors that they're going to start killing the elderly or people that have disabilities just as a way to keep the population down. And so she has cerebral palsy. So the reason I picked CP was one, so my son, they thought he might have CP. He does not, but they thought he did. And so when I was originally writing this, I was learning a lot about CP because of wondering if that's something that my son was going to deal with growing up. But my sister-in-law also has cerebral palsy. And it's really, I think, inspiring to see people that have cerebral palsy or other sorts of physical disabilities and see what they're still able to accomplish. And so they're kind of the two foils to each other. So Cam is very, very physically powerful. He's a guy you'd want to have on your side in a fight. But then again, from that emotional standpoint, he's struggling. And then Czech's the inverse of that, where Czech is extremely resilient and has learned to be tough, but from a physical standpoint is a little bit more frail. And so they're kind of the main characters of the story.
That's super cool, because I love hearing authors talk about the characters that they create, because as a reader you can gain so much information by inferring and seeing there, but sometimes it makes it more special to hear things like that. And so what are some other interesting things in the book that the readers might not know, but would be kind of cool to know about, maybe something you put in the world or another inspiration behind something?
Yeah, so one of the things that was really fun was thinking what would actually happen to a world where only a few cities survived, but they were totally separated from each other. And it's been that way for like 150 years. And so there are some expressions of this that you see in the book. So they go from town to town, and some terminologies will change, accents change as you go from town to town. Some of this is not explored as much in the book, but I have in like my world building notes is different cities have different rates of inflation. There's different religious points of views as you go from city to city. One of the conversations that characters have is that there's this legend of people that have learned how to survive in the Sundered Lands, and depending on which city you're in, it's given a different name. And so that's another idea, another area for exploration. I thought that was tons of fun. And you see how the cultures of the different cities change depending on which city that you're in. It kind of starts out, I wanted to do very classic fantasy, so he shows up in a farm town. I know that's tropey, but it's kind of my tip of the hat to classic fantasy. And so the farm town is very agrarian. They have a lot of space, a lot of resources, and so things are much more peaceful there. And then it flips, and you see the urban environment, the city of Wrath, where things are very overpopulated, and there's not enough resources to go around. And you can, I think, feel that as you read it, this intensity of life and this pressure of life. And then as the story goes on, he'll go to different towns under the protected shrouds, and you can see like one of them leans heavily into art, and art as a form of defiance. And it's like, hey, everything around us is horrible, but we're still going to celebrate beauty. And there's not a ton of time to go explore that, but you just see that kind of come to life with, okay, this city has all these murals and spiraling towers, and then over here there's no art at all. Everything has to be practical because there's not enough to go around. And so that was the most fun thing to write. Some of that the reader is going to be able to see. Other stuff is just going to live in my world building notes. But yeah, just how a community would change if it was literally sundered from each other.
That was really cool.
And actually, world building is one of my favorite parts about your book. I thought that the vibes were impeccable. And can you tell us and can like give the viewers a little sneak peek into what Sundered Lands look and feel like? What's the landscape like?
Sure. Yeah. So the Sundered Lands is. So what happened is, or you'll have to read the book to find out what happened, but something happened, and if you leave one of these protected bubbles, and not every town got one, so only a few did, but if you leave one of these protected bubbles, you feel right away that this is you're in a bad place. What inspired it was there was a freak cold snap in the Midwest, and the wind chill was -30. And so I walked outside one time, and you just get that shock of how cold it is. You breathe in, and it hurts your lungs to breathe. And I thought, like, oh, man, like, what if it's not that the temperature drops in the Sundered Lands, but you get that same level of shock of, like, I'm not supposed to be here. It being painful to breathe is a theme. A lot of characters struggle to breathe and are coughing as they go throughout it. The sky changes from blue to this dark red, clouds turn black, and they're always kind of moving. I had this idea that sometimes the clouds could come down and that they were like boiling. And I wrote a scene with it, and it just didn't work, but I still like that idea that it's like this boiling clouds that could come down and like melt the skin right off of you. But then two things start happening once you go into the Sundered Lands. And one is your physical body starts breaking down. And so every person is going to react a little bit differently. Some have it break down very quickly. Others are a little bit slower. But you'll start getting boils all over your skin. Your hair could start falling out. Some characters might have their bones impacted. And so like their bones start to liquefy. So horrific stuff. But then the other thing that starts happening is you are being transformed. And so I mentioned there's a lot of monsters that are out in this world. And so my thought is the idea is that anything that is in the Sundered Lands, any living thing, will be transformed into a monster. If it doesn't kill you first, you will be transformed into this mindless monster. And so there's a lot of crazy monsters that are running around in the Sundered Lands just because of that transformation. And this is a painful transformation. You can feel it starting to happen. And some people, their mind starts being transformed first. And so you look human or look mostly human. But then it turns out there's no shroud of humanity left in you. It's like from a mental standpoint, you're just a monster. So that's it in a nutshell. And so I really wanted to make it, if you snapped your fingers and were going to show up in some sort of fantasy environment, that this was going to need to rank near the bottom of places you would want to go. You know, the Shire can be up, near number 1 or 2, and the Sundered Lands, I was really wanting this to be on the bottom of people's lists.
Like Mordor.
Yeah. Mordor was a big inspiration for what it would be like, yeah.
That's super cool. Well, we hope that everyone that's been watching this is really excited to go ahead and read Shadows of the Sundered Lands, and we hope you love it as much as we did. So if it isn't already up by the time you're watching this, we will be launching a Kickstarter soon for Corbin's book. We can't wait for you to check it out. And so before we head out, Corbin, where can people find you?
Sure. So I have an Instagram account at Corbin Rook Author, and then a newsletter as well, corbinrookauthor.com.
Awesome. We are so excited for this book to see the world. I'm so excited to launch it. So thank you everyone who watched us. Thank you, Corbin, for being here, and see you in the next video.